welcome everybody and thank you for coming. Well, I'm delighted to introduce Sheikh Idris Watts. A lot of you may know him. He's a prominent Arabic scholar, teacher in Arabic in Bradford, translator of a major devotional book from the Moroccan tradition. Have you brought any copies with you?
Yes, well, they've got the other the lecture.
Right, and you'll sign them for people?
Well, if the Ijaz has come, I think they've gone, unfortunately, with the other.
Oh, right. Well, I'm really looking forward to this. Those that attended the earlier talks today on Islamic psychology, I referred to Ibn Arabi's views on the zikr of the body, the connection of the body with the spiritual self. And Idris, I then discovered, is training, but knows quite a lot about the bodywork movement of therapy, which I was aware of, and I thought would connect with Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi will provide a sort of theological understanding of bodywork and also the sort of sports. So I asked Idris to have a look at it, and mashallah he has, and has been in contact, I know, with probably the top Ibn Arabi scholar, certainly one in the world today. But I don't know what he's come up with. So I'm all agog. So over to you, Idris.
Thank you very much. It's afternoon now, isn't it? Good afternoon to everybody. Assalamu alaikum to you all. Peace be upon you. Right, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. First of all, I'd like to give my thanks to a few people. I wish to thank Hakim Archuleta, who's been instrumental. He's if you don't know of him, a very influential Muslim convert from the late 1960s, who's a homeopathist and works in body therapy. So he's been instrumental really in guiding me through this work. Also Dr. Rashid, I'm very thankful for sort of directing me towards the work of Ibn Arabi, because really me and Hakim, we're really passionate about grounding this work in Islamic practice and understanding. And so that's really, and because of that, he pointed me and directed me towards Dr. Samir Mahmood, which he's been instrumental as well. And I've just recently been in conversation with him about Ibn Arabi's play on this theme of the body and how it relates to prayer, and how the body relates to the mind and the brain as well. And so I wish to thank them first and foremost. Now, let's contextualize this. Do excuse me, in my talks, I like to sort of tell you my journey because it contextualizes things for me. And so this also really, one particular event highlighted for me the importance of this work that I'm going to speak about today. And that's where I'm sitting in, I think it's Batley, and I have this very large Pakistani man massaging my feet. He's a reflexologist, and after the session he gave me a summary of my issues, and he says, you just need to chill out and relax. And when he said that, I was like, yeah, but how do I do that? And so we all know, I think a lot of us know what we should be doing. We know intellectually, rationally, really where we should be, but we can't seem to get it working. And this is really what I'm going to focus on today, this dichotomy between the theory and the practice, and how we really struggle with that in this modern age, and why we struggle with that. And so that's really, and why was I in this session with this reflexologist? Was really, I got to a stage in my practice of my religion, or just my life experience really, where I was overwhelmed, and I was like, I'm burning myself out. Why I can't seem to sort of get that sense of well-being and groundedness that I've thought that my religion should give me, a sense of groundedness and so forth. And I'm not. What I want to highlight here is that I'm not saying that the religion doesn't give that, but it's our implementation of our religion that's the problem that sometimes interferes with that. And so I was saying, I do dhikr, I invocate, I meditate. I read Quran, I pray, I do all these things, but so why should I be in these circumstances where I'm literally waking up in the morning and feeling completely burnt out and just stressed with what's going on in my life and my day? So that was really the journey, and so I ended up with this reflexologist, and he said, you need to chill out. And I knew I needed to chill out, but how do I actually do that? And this is what, so I became very passionate about this. How do I embody a sense of peace and well-being? And so this is what led me down this path, really. So really, as I said, my journey at where we're at, really, I think my life is a really reflection for everybody, is what the problem is. And I think now I'm getting my finger on the pulse. And this is really exciting work, but it's very much in its developmental stages for us as Muslims in how to embody this. And so one term that the Hakim Archuleta loves, that sort of, let me, is this term. I don't even know how to pronounce it properly. Maybe there's someone who's got a medical background here. Simultanagnosia, is that? Simultanagnosia, it means the inability to perceive more than a single object at a time and integrate the components of the scene. So you get so fixated on you can't see the wood through the trees. And this is really the major issue, I think, for us in our current climate, is that we become so fixated we can't really pan back and see what's going on. And because of modern life, the contractions we have and so forth, it only exasperates our situation in that we're so focused like this. And this was very much for me, I was so bound up in my books. There's me leaning with my nose literally 10 centimetres away from a book, that I don't give myself time to pan out and really contextualise and see how that fits into my life. And so we live in, and Hakim Archuleta, he speaks about when we're not distracted. It's not an issue of distraction, it's an issue of being fragmented. Basically, you're in loads of different areas at once, and that's leaving us feeling very much just all over the place, is probably the best term to use. And so we have these questions, don't we? The most common question I'm asked as a religious sort of leader in the community is, why can't I focus in prayer? That's the most typical question I'm asked. And we can come up with all these explanations, but this is really what this all leads to. My memory's going, why can't I focus? And we think that basically our memory's dying, but I think that there's an element of truth to that to a certain extent, like through diet and other issues that our brains are suffering. But at the same time, I think it's more of being fragmented. Is that we're so in so many places at once that we can't really give our focus in order to really absorb where we are. Because memory, I did a memory course, and the whole thing about memory is about you being absorbed in the moment, you're present. The reason you can't remember that person's name after they walked away was because you were thinking about what you've got to say next to them after you've asked their name. So you already weren't with them when you were asking for their name. And so it's an issue of not being present. And so this is what Hakim Archuleta, and Dr. Samir Mahmood, in his paper that everyone's been asking me about, where can you get hold of it? Well, you can't get hold of it, because he won't let me give it out, because he's rewriting it. And so he's planning to release it. The creative matrix of the body is the first concept that he talks about of Ibn Arabi, is being the people, he speaks about the people of Ahlul Hudur, these people of presence. And so he speaks about how that's key. And from an Islamic perspective, we see that to be present, you have to integrate all three aspects: the body, the mind, and the soul. To be spiritually enlightened, to feel connected to God, is not an escape from the gross reality, the physical reality. And the best example of that probably is in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, where he ascends to the heavens with his physical form. He's not trying to escape. And unfortunately, a lot of meditative practice and religious practice, we end up, it's actually a form of disassociation. It's not a form of spirituality. It's you just wanting to escape your current circumstances and your how you feel and so forth. And this isn't spirituality. In fact, spirituality is to be present with that. The people of Ahlul Hudur, people are present in the way that God has placed them, and they're content with that, even if it's uncomfortable, that they have to start with acceptance of that and being present with that. And so that's, in the paper, he speaks about that, and so that's very, very key, this concept of presence. And so then he brings it in the paper. He's speaking primarily about the body and how, as I said, the body is connected to the mind, and it's connected to the soul. And how another key concept of Ibn Arabi when it comes to spiritual connection is how our bodies communicate with us. Okay, and so I'm going to go through a few traditions on this. Okay, so the first is a verse of Quran, and there is absolutely nothing except that it glorifies and praises Him, yet you don't comprehend its modality. So, and the scholars, they battle back and forth. Is this figurative? Is this literal? Does everything literally make tasbih of Allah, glorify God Almighty? And it's literally speaking. And we have traditions in our religion that seem to insinuate that. There's a very famous one where the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be on, picked up a set of stones, and they could literally hear it humming with the remembrance of God. And so we do have traditions that seem to allude to the fact that everything has a language, and everything is communicating to us. And so this is the first concept, is that everything has a language, and everything wishes to communicate with everything around it, because it's all interconnected. And so that's the first thing there. And let me just skip that and come back to that. Sorry, I know I'll come back actually. Now, this is another key principle here that Dr. Rashid spoke about, which is the concept of fitrah. Okay, and so from an Islamic understanding, we understand that everything necessarily has a primordial way of being, that God has created it. Okay, and I want to look at this tradition. It's slightly controversial, I suppose, so I'll try to highlight what I believe the Prophet Muhammad is getting at here. So there is no newborn except they are born on a natural primordial disposition, which we call in Arabic fitrah, meaning your body, your soul, your mind knows what it wants. And if you think it's so fascinating, children are so fascinating because they literally know what they want in a lot of ways. And we sort of interfere with the process sometimes. Okay, obviously we have to educate our children and raise them and sometimes stop them from doing silly things. But it doesn't stop that there's a natural impulse towards something, and we're trying to understand what that is. And we see that in the physiology of children, that they are far more natural in their physiology, the way they carry themselves than we do. I did this really crude test of this, is that I put a set of keys on the floor, and the child, I get two children, I think one child I did it with was about 1 or 2, the other one was about 4 or 5. And the youngest child, when he goes to pick up the keys, he comes down like this, picks them up, and picks it up. Now, that's the first child. What do you think the second child does? Yeah. So what I'd like to highlight here is, and when I did some reading into Alexander technique, people familiar with this, with body posture, is that is the way we're naturally supposed to pick up things. We're not supposed to bend over. It's very bad for our posture. And so what I'd like to highlight is how quickly we come out of fitrah. And why is that? It's because of the interaction with our surroundings. So let me put this heading in that context. It's very important. And so what I believe the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, we can take this from many different angles. Primarily speaking about faith, we can't deny that, but there's always different nuances that can be carried here. And so he says, then their parents raised them as a Jew, Christian, or Zoroastrian. And so the understanding is they become conditioned. And we all become conditioned. But the Muslim parent, what they're trying to do, the ultimate aim is obviously to guide them to what is their natural disposition. Okay, that's the Muslim's focus. We're trying to guide them to the natural disposition, and we have to be cautious about directing them towards something that is not in tune with the fitrah, i.e. this element, this sense, this ultimate sense of absolute pure oneness in terms of faith and theology, monotheism, but also in our interaction with everything around us, that we are interconnected, okay, and that we come from something that is very divine and very beyond our own consciousness. That there is an ultimate consciousness that is pure, and the whole experience of life is to connect to that. And to do that, we have to be connected to ourselves. And that's the famous statement, it's not a hadith, but it's usually attributed, is Yahya ibn Mu'adh al-Razi, whoever knows himself, knows his Lord. It's interesting it says Lord here, because the Lord means in Arabic the nurturer, from tarbiyah to nurturing. So he has, in order to know God, he has to know himself and know the people around him. So he has to be connected. Now, this is what I find really fascinating about this tradition, because no one usually quotes the last of it. It is like an animal who produces a wholesome, another wholesome animal. The child it produces. Do you sense that it has any deformity? Because the Arabs, they used to cut the ear, and they used to they used to cut parts of the animal, like we do with the sheep. We cut the tails and so forth, like it's in its pristine form. And so we don't have this concept of original sin in Islam, and we have this understanding that the human does know what it needs. And that just has to be channeled and filtered and directed by the people, the society and the people around them. Okay, so this is key to this whole concept. Another verse that Samir brings in the article, he gave everything its creation and then guided it. So and that God is still communicating through with us, through the creation. The creation is a manifestation, a reflection of what God wants from us. Okay? And so that's a key concept as well. The other is now we have some sorts of traditions and verses of Quran that seem explicit that the limbs specifically have a form of communication. Okay? And I said always with religious texts, you've always got this battle, do you take it figuratively or literally and so forth. And in the Islamic tradition we try to harmonise the both. We try, as long as it doesn't conflict with reason completely and conflict with any other traditions that are stronger, but we try to harmonise them and say it can possibly convey both meanings. And so we say, in the morning, the limbs speak out at the tongue. Have fear of God concerning us, for if you are upright, we shall be so too. And if you are crooked, we shall be so too. So the tongue is actually a vehicle to manifest our inner being. And this harmony, that basically, what's really interesting is the most crooked of our limbs, it seems to be suggesting, is our tongues. It's the one that can become corrupted more than any other limb. And that the other limbs are trying to basically send messages to the rest of our body and how to interact. Okay? And it's about how to attune to that, what the body needs. And that will always be in tune, that will ultimately always be in tune with fitra, the primordial disposition. But we have to be connected and integrate our whole experience in order to gain that communication. Okay. And then we have from the next life, on the day when their tongues, their hands, and their feet shall bear witness against them for what they used to do. And this is really interesting, because it's as if the limbs have their own separate consciousness, and we can actually conflict with that, and they're going to basically say, what on earth did you do with us? And Imam Ghazali speaks about these. These are the forces, the legions that we have command over. And I'm sure Dr. Rashid spoke about this sort of concept. Like the horse he even spoke about, is that you have to be connected. That's a beautiful analogy if you think about it, because you know when you sit in a car, you feel in absolute control. But when you get on a horse, you're like, oh my God, this thing's I think it's got a will of its own. And you have to attune. There's a sense, and so this, with the nature, you gain it with something that you can't gain from the machines and technology, and so with the animal, you have to attune to it and know what it really needs. And if you try to, be harsh with it and control it, then it would just rebel. And so, where's illness come from? Is this inability to integrate with and communicate with the rest of our being, and our limbs very much know what they should be doing, but they are subordinate to our own, this will that we have and this mind, and that's going to be very important later on. I'm going to talk about that. Okay. And so on the day they were saying, we weren't supposed to be used for this, what on earth are you playing at? And the person will actually, in one narration, the person will come on the day of judgment to be judged, And he will basically say, I'll defend myself, I'm a good enough, I can be my own lawyer. And he stands up there and he thinks he's going to get him to jam his way through the whole, the scene. And then all of a sudden, a mat is sometimes placed over his mouth and his limbs start speaking. So they start communicating, saying, no, he didn't do that. He did this with me. So, and this is really interesting when Peter Levine, who's the founder of somatic experiencing, is one of the foremost therapies in body language. He speaks about procedural memories and how memory is stored in the body. Okay, and this is obvious because when, a classic example of this is where your body, you've forgotten how to ride a bike, but as soon as you get back on it, your body sort of just takes over. So it's become so embedded in your being, and it's the sort of the memories stored there, even though it's not conscious mind, it's not conscious memory, it's procedural memory, it's implicit memory, and how trauma actually is embodied more in the body. And your body is speaking. My wife has to stop me. I see people with these twitches, and I become fascinated. I'm like, oh, there's some trauma in that body. Oh, I'd love to, there's this one man, he just kept doing this with his body. It's as if the body was speaking, okay, communicating. I need to finish off a process that's not been completed, and it wants to. But you become completely oblivious to it consciously, and it needs someone else sometimes to point out that. Listen, these people that incessantly tap their foot. Sorry for anyone that's probably doing that. It's as if the body's wanting to take action to something that it was overwhelmed by, and it wants to make sense of that. The body wants to make sense of that, and it's not a conscious thing. So this is really what this is all about. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, listen, he says, is there not a morsel of flesh in the body, which if wholesome, the whole body shall be so, and if corrupt, the whole body shall be so. So this is a famous tradition, but what he's saying here is saying there's an interconnectedness, and there has to be a communication. With this, the heart, which we see not necessarily as the fleshy piece of the morsel of flesh, but it's the centre of the human being. And there's many words for heart in Arabic. Qalb can have two nuances in Arabic. Qalb is to flip something. You're trying to figure it out. You're looking at it from both angles before you actually accept it in your body. So the idea that something comes into your consciousness, you wrestle with it, what that person's saying, is it true or not? And then you basically let it through into your being, and it shifts your map of reality, your inner map of reality. That's one nuance, and the other nuance is that you flip from state to state constantly, and so you ask God to keep you firm. Okay, because we're constantly shifting and changing our opinions. When you're 3-year-old, what do you want? Ice cream. When you're 8, what do you want? iPad. When you're 15, what do you want? And your consciousness is constantly expanding and changing and shifting. So and that has to be integrated with what your body needs and what your soul needs, your mind needs, and what your body needs. Your soul mind needs. The one involved now, I find this really fascinating because this isn't written, but this is real mindfulness here. Is that the one involved in illicit relations, sexual relations, does not do so whilst they are a believer. The one who steals does not do so whilst they are a believer. The one who consumes wine, so anyone who commits sin, basically, they're not a believer. The scholars tackled with this. How is this possible? Because this means basically what? You lose your faith when you do these? And so the scholars say it doesn't mean that. It's not literal. You can't take this for literal because you don't become a disbelief. My goodness me would be from disbelief to belief, disbelief to belief. How that would be chaos for us. What he's saying is you're not fully conscious in your belief. You're not at an ultimate state of belief when you're that. So the idea is when you're in tune, you know what you should be doing, and it's impossible for you to do something that conflicts with your nature. But we're constantly shifting. This is the nature of life, is we're shifting from consciousness to unconsciousness. And there's a mercy in it as well as a problem for us as human beings. And so we come to this is where, I can get a script a bit. This is where, so why are we out of tune? This is the next question that's raised. Why are we out of tune with what our body, what our primordial nature needs and wants? Okay, why is this happening, and why do we do things that we regret and so forth? Why can't we integrate what we understand? Why can't we move from what we understand and know to be what we should be doing to actual practice? A perfect example, go home, the worst thing I could do when I go home, I'm stressed, and I know definitely sitting in front of the TV for 5 hours or eating ice cream is not going to help me. Short term it will, but long term it's not going to solve the problem. that would be, so I'm going to sit and meditate for 30 minutes or turn in prayer or whatever, and then you go home, what do you do? Yeah. You go and sit in front of the TV and eat ice cream. Uh-oh. I don't even know I'm getting challenged now. What happened there?
I think it crashed.
I think I pressed the button. Oh, I think it was this one, I think. The most vital slide. Technical support.
So I get some...
No, but so, then I came across a guy called Ian McIlgrist. I don't know if anyone's heard about him. And he's got a book, Ian McIlgrist, called The Master and His Emissary. Ian McIlgrist is a psychiatrist, if my memory serves me correctly. And he has got this passion of studies of the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And he's at the top of his field really in addressing these issues. And the idea is that our brain is got two hemispheres. We've got the left and the right. Okay. And what's really fascinating is that the right hemisphere of our brain is the first part of our brain that develops. It develops far, quicker than the left side. The left is still very basic. But then the left brain, within about 6 months of the child's development, starts to really kick in and start developing. And they say that one way we actually know that happens is because this is one of the around 6 months is when the child reaches out. And if you know your right limbs are connected to the left hemisphere. Okay. And so what we're understanding here is you're trying to grasp your life around you. You start becoming more objective, seeing the world around you rather than subjective. Before that, the child's very much consumed by its own identity. It sees everything around it as itself, which is really fascinating. And so what we understand here is that the right hemisphere of the brain, which I'm going to look at its features. I do apologise for the font there. Can you work that out, the yellow font? No? Or I'll read it out for you people. Is that the right side of the brain is connected far more to the body, whilst the left is disconnected from the body if it doesn't allow the right brain to process the information and move it to the left. Okay? There's this constant process of absorbing information, sending it back. And so what's interesting about the right side of the brain, it develops first. It focuses on the moment. It's completely consumed in the moment. It's not thinking about past and present. Okay? It doesn't relate to that. Next one, it focuses on relationships. So it's much more interested in being connecting to others or things, communicating, cooperation, so forth. It's open to new experiences. It doesn't crash when something conflicts with its belief in life. It rather goes, "Ooh, interesting," and it's curious and wishes to learn and be engaged. Next, it's in touch with the body, and that's key. Okay. It's open to the bigger picture. It can pan out basically and see the wood through the trees. Okay. It focuses on enjoying the moment rather than thinking, what's the next thing I've got to do? Okay. So it's not target driven. It's rather just wants to absorb itself in the moment and just take it all in what's going on. It is absorbed in the narrative of the story and feels as if it's real. So the right side of your brain, when you're watching a movie and you're going, oh my God, that's terrible. That is your right side connecting. While the left is what my dad says, well, that's unrealistic. That would never happen. Yeah, that's my dad's left brain kicking in. So it separates itself and just says, that's not me, really, the left brain. It focuses on enjoying the moment. It absorbs in the narrative. It has an overwhelming sense of oneness and connection to the reality. Now, what's really important here is we're not saying this is brilliant and this is rubbish. You need both, because if you're absorbed in and feeling connected with everything, you'll be just staring at your navel for the rest of your life and just wow, And that's not what life's about. You do have to reach out and be connected. Okay? Next, it sees relationships as a means to connect, empathise, and cooperate, and it's far more active in the world. It wants practice. It wants to be engaged, and it's not interested in the theory. It's like, I just want to live it. Next, left hemisphere then. So I've done it in black and grey and white for a specific reason. So it develops after around 6 months. It focuses on past and future. Okay, it's not looking at the now. It focuses on individual needs. It's very selfish, okay, which is necessary, but if it's the predominant feature, it's very problematic. So it's just thinking, what can I get from this relationship? Opposed to new information that conflicts with its sets of beliefs and map of reality, whether fact or not. If something comes to it it doesn't like, or just doesn't seem to fit with it goes, either consciously or subconsciously, it just completely ignores it. It sees the body as a machine and doesn't trust body wisdom if it's disconnected from the right hemisphere. Okay, it won't trust. So you say, you know, what's your heart telling you? Don't tell that to someone who's got extreme left brain, you know, an extremely left hemisphere brain. It won't want to hear that sort of language. So see, the body focuses more on details. It becomes fixated on details. Focuses on performance and goals. This is why the working world and the educational system is messed up, I believe, because this is why we're feeling so completely disconnected. It can separate itself from the narrative of stories. It sees the world around it separate from itself. It sees relationships and it's far more passive and observant. It just wants to sit back and, you know, just work it out before it actually engages and so forth. It feels a bit uncomfortable just being thrown in and learning as you go along. Now, does that relate to any of you? Yeah? Usually you marry the person you marry has the other one. Yeah, one of you's extreme left brain, the other one's extreme. And God's put you together so you can get to the corpus callosum and, you know, the flesh between the two that sort of brings it. He wants you, it's like a pull from the other hemisphere over to the middle. Okay, so this is where half our problems come from, I think, in our system. And so there's this extreme extremity. I'm not saying the West is very much, because of our civil, you know, our traditions are very much based, and I believe that even the Muslim world fell into this, is that very Hellenistic tradition, rationalistic, which is needed, we're not denying that, but where it becomes the be and an end all, you miss the wood through the trees and you're completely, and you think, I know what I should be doing, why can't I? It's because you need to connect to the right side, okay? And sometimes the right needs to, you know, connect to this. And so what's really fascinating I found about this is that what happens is you have an experience and your body's telling you what you're experiencing through the senses, and then it goes to the left makes sense of it, and then the left naturally wants to write it down and record it. But the problem is once you've recorded it, guess what? It's dead already. So that information that the left brain is recording, it's constantly got to go back. What's doing is, once it goes over to the left sends it back to the right and sends it down, and it's constantly analysing it. And so that's what we do in research, isn't it? We're constantly having to retest our theories and so forth. But the problem is that if you rely purely on this, it ends up dying, and it doesn't relate to your experience. And so our bodies are telling us, this is what we're experiencing. And our mind's saying, no, that's completely illogical, don't listen to that. And you cause a schizophrenic split. Okay? And we feel so out of tune with ourselves. I think that's profound, honestly. And this is my little take. Don't give it or take it. So I say this is a reflection of the globe of the world, is that the Western world is here, the Eastern world is here, and this is my own religious bias. Mecca's right in the middle. That's my take, so give it or leave it. But I feel that I do feel that Islam has a potential to balance these two out, and it did historically do that, and this is where Ibn Arabi comes into, because what I think so far, you know, when I put Ibn Arabi, I knew this was going to happen on my Facebook page. I have, he's a heathen, he's this, he's that, and I think you're just, oh, you left-brainers, just come over to the right for a minute. Ibn Arabi was addressing an issue in his time, and that was, you know, and what's so fascinating about Ibn Arabi is, I believe that his tradition was a means to take all the Eastern tradition and philosophy and culture and Islamify it, and codify it in a way that's conducive to the Islamic understanding, the theology. And that's what's so beautiful about Islam historically, is that what they did. They weren't closed. They weren't saying, well, hang on a minute, this is our way of worldview, and you have to conform to us. That's not how Muslims ever historically did that. They will come and they will absorb all this information and say, how do we understand this through our, telescope's not a good analogy, through our prism or paradigm. How do we understand this? And that's when Islam thrived, because it was experience and cognitive understanding and rational scientists were in harmony with those things. And Ibn Arabi really personifies that, I think, and that's why he's most misunderstood. So when I was so there's some Albert Einstein summed it up, didn't he? Where he says the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and so the right brain and the body wisdom, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honours the servant and has forgotten the gift. I think that really summed it. And that you can have beef with Albert Einstein, I think, if you disagree. But that's, I think that, and then Dr. Omar Abdullah said something very profound recently about this. Modern science is not empirical. It does not use the senses. It uses instruments, measurements, and a type of mathematics that is brilliant, but it's not directly connected with objective reality. And it is of a Cartesian dualism which radically separates between the subject and the object. That's profound. I mean, this is what we're living. And so my question, how am I doing for time, Dr. Rashid?
I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions.
Yeah, because what I wanted to do is, this is all theory, this is all left-brained. I wanted a practice. Okay. So you're probably saying, well, it's all lovely. How do I? So if I can't do the practice, I'll do. It's how do we connect then? And there's a book called it's called Words That Touch, and it's a book by Nick Pohl that came out this year that talks about clean language in therapy, how you have to be very careful about the therapist projecting his view, and you have to elicit from the client, the practitioner, and how to do that. Language questions that sort of elicit rather than project, and so forth, and control their dialogue and steer in a certain direction. And he's got 3 chapters in there where he mentions the 3 most important people in this development of the body therapy. He mentions first of all Eugene Genlin, who he had the concept of the felt self. So the felt self is very much based in Eastern meditation. It's basically tuning in with the body. The felt self is the connection between the body and the mind. And if you've ever done any sort of mindfulness body scanning, is anyone familiar with that? So the brain's triune. It has thoughts, it has feelings, and it has sensations. And our sensations are really the primary way in which we experience the world. As a child, it was the brain stem, the reptilian brain or so forth, which is a world of sensations. Then we have feelings, then we have thoughts. And the felt self is getting back to that connection, because the brain stem is what basically, through its channels, the thoughts and feelings. And so it's the connection to the body, which Stephen Porges, in his polyvagal theory, if anyone's, this is the next gentleman, he talks about that, the vagus nerve, and how it connects the brain to the vascular, is that the right term? The organs, basically. And we say we have gut, I've got gut feeling about something, my heart's not in this, I feel like my feet, I feel, stand on your own 2 feet. These expressions about the body that really are true. They're, about how our body's trying to communicate to us and how we're feeling. So the felt self is about sensations. And the problem with thoughts they're a loop. If you get caught in your thoughts and you try to change your thought patterns, it's very, very difficult generally, because they just go from one thought to the other. It's like and then feelings, what do feelings do? They absorb you. You feel angry, you just feel overtaken. So they're a problem from this perspective as well. But sensations flow in and flow out and come in. They're very temporal. And so it's a means to not identify with what's going on, but accept what's going on. So when I come into this room and I see you all sitting here, and I sense a change in my, what's going on in my body, and that's translated into a feeling. I don't feel too comfortable. They all look like, they don't like me. I don't feel comfortable. I feel nervous. These are feelings, which is converted into a thought. They're not going to like what I have to say today. Okay. Now, if you get locked in the thoughts and feelings, it's a trap. But if you can take back, as I'm having those thoughts, and as I'm having those feelings, what am I feeling in my body right now? That's the question. And you take it to sensations rather than feelings and thoughts. And that way you don't identify with them, and you just see them as flowing in and out. Okay? You're still engaged with them, and then you're able to basically adjust and act accordingly. But the problem in our life, we get overwhelmed by our feelings, or we get locked in thoughts that are in our heads. and that's a disconnection from the body, and the way to connect back to the body, as Stephen Porges talks about in his polyvagal theory, is through the felt sense, which connects the vagus nerve to the brain. So Salir Mahmood sums it all up. Full presence of heart means full involvement of the body until this is his summary of Ibn Arabi's work, until the heart sinks into the body, which has become passive in the hands of God who moves it. And it's really, I mean, an hour doesn't really allow me to really speak about this. It's really profound, because after sensations, all you've got is energy that's touching that, and then where's that source from, that energy? There's something separate from the creation that's beyond everything, and you just feel an ultimate sense of connection to the divine. It's very, very profound. I think it's the most practical way in order to really feel God working in your life, when you take things back to the sensations, because it's our most basic, primordial way of experiencing life. And so what are sensations? People get confused. So here is we have two states. We have two primary ways of interacting with the world, which even basic organisms have. You know, like those, what do you call them in the sea, those urchins, is it sea urchin? Where they open up and close. And so this is a primary way of experiencing the world. We're either open to the experience, or we're closed to the experience. Okay, so we've got expansion, which the Sufis talk about. In Islam, we have this concept of qabd, constriction, and bast, expansion, being open. So what are sensations of expansion? Flowing, aware, fluid, free, tingly sensations, floating, a sense of being floating, warm, electric, deep, light, stable, firm, secure, calm, expansive, full, loose. Constriction, numb, disconnected, stiff, knotted, achy, hollow, tight, heavy, cold, itchy, dizzy, blocked, shaky, queasy, frozen, wobbly, tremulous. So these are what I mean by sensations, not anger, not scared. They're feelings, they're not sensations. Okay? So this is the world we're dealing with. This is a communication of the felt sense. And so, how are we doing? We were really limited, yeah. So the way I would, and really, your left brains are saying, well, no, I can't relate to this. And that's why it's imperative that we have a practical aspect. So the way I would do this, because I have to, is that basically someone either closes their eyes if they're comfortable, or has their eyes open. It's not, they say, they sit in a comfortable chair. We're not going to do this because we don't have time, unfortunately. Where you experience this, and you start to basically, first by communicating with the senses, you say, what are you hearing? So you focus on the hearing. What are you seeing? So you slowly open your eyes, and you allow that lighting just to be present and absorb yourself in that. Then come to smell, come to taste, come to feeling the outward body. So it's a typical mindful exercise. Then we take to the breath, okay, as long as people feel comfortable with that, and then we go into the body. And we start assessing what are the sensations I'm feeling in my feet. We always start with the feet because you feel most grounded in your feet. Your limbs you feel more comfortable with because you can protect yourself. These are very sensitive parts. The privates, the stomach, the chest, generally these are very sensitive parts. So we don't start with those. And we start moving up and tracking. What am I feeling in my feet at this moment? And you say nothing, that's still something. Okay. So people say, I don't know, numbness, that's all that is. Okay. And this is an exercise that takes time. It's a muscle that needs to develop. If you're not used to this, it's like learning another language. And the more you practice this, the more you're able to actually not be overwhelmed by circumstances and engage yourself in a way that you are able to deal with your situations. And so you track up now. The point I wanted to link it to the theme today is what something very profound is. Once you feel your feet and you feel your shins or whatever it is, you say, my shins are connected to my feet. Yeah. What are my feet? What's that relationship between them? You connect with the different parts. Okay. What happens a lot in this, which Hakim Archuleta is called my chi, he calls it, where your body actually wants to do something. It starts even wanting to sink and compress because it's, you know, when it's finally acknowledges I am tired, and it just starts to compress. But then what's beautiful about the work is you start to flower after a while. Once you've accepted that you are feeling a bit overwhelmed and just want to compress, then you allow your body actually starts to grow, and it's very similar to Qigong and Tai Chi. This movement, the body, and things. So this is a means to communicate and a means to be interactive, and then to move that into prayer. So what I found very profound just a few days ago, I just noticed this, is that when you say Allahu Akbar, the scholars recommend that when you say Allahu Akbar, God is great, you actually you prolong it to the movement. So you say Allahu Akbar. So through the whole movement you're mentioning God. And at the same time tracking what you're feeling in your body, and you're thinking, oh my God, this is what you're experiencing in life, you're feeling connected. And so it's this movement, and acknowledging God is behind this movement, that you're doing this, and you feel engaged in prayer. So that's the answer back to the original question, how do I focus more in prayer? It's that. Okay, so I do acknowledge times alone. So that's just this is a very brief introduction to the work. Okay, so.